Welcome to this meeting of the Agile Government Center. It's actually our third year we were just talking about. We kicked this off 3 years ago. And we're really excited about today's meeting where Ed DeSev is going to talk about his latest Agile report on the future of Agile government. We've got a great panel assembled for you today to talk about that. We've got a great moderator and Dan Chennick, and we look forward to your participation throughout the session. So please, as you have questions, comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. We want to make sure that we are able to answer people's questions and get your comments as we go forward. So again, thank you for your participation today. So with that, I will turn it over to Dan Chennick, who's Executive Director of the IBM Center for the Business of Government. Who'll be having a conversation with Ed DeSev, who's our coordinator for the Agile Government Center. So Dan and Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. And am I coming in loud and clear?
You are.
Great. Well, thanks, Joe, and congratulations to the Academy, to you and the team and Terry for this virtual third birthday, as it were, of the Agile Government Center, which was announced at the Napa Fall meeting in 2019, and certainly been busy ever since with lots of work led by the coordinator of the center, who I'm honored to be joined with, Ed DeSev. I will just note that Ed has had a highly distinguished career over many years of government service, working as a chief financial officer, working as the deputy director for management and controller at the Office of Management and Budget, leading the recovery effort for the Obama White House, working with Vice President Biden at the time, and a Napa Fellow, Ed, you noted of 30 years standing. So probably the ranking Napa Fellow, or possibly, certainly among our panel. And also, Ed is also now newly designated in his status as a visiting fellow, as an executive fellow with the IBM Center in light of his significant work on the Agile Government Center, which is a collaborative effort between the Academy and the IBM Center. So Ed, all of that. And also you've been very busy globally, because last week, some of you may have seen that Ed co-authored a report with Academy Fellow Janine O'Flynn about modernizing digital services in Australia to build public trust. And he and Janine drew a number of insights from the report that we'll discuss today. So a global audience for this work. So Ed, welcome. Thank you for joining. And Ed, you're on mute.
Now I'm off. Delighted to be here, Dan. Thank you.
Great. So this is the fourth major report done by the Agile Government Center. And in addition, we, of course, have other research that the IBM Center has published in the area of agility, starting with your initial paper, The Road to Agile Government, sort of the lead up to that, and then including building an agile federal government that the Academy did in collaboration with the Project Management Institute with support from the Samuel Freeman Trust. And then Agile Regulation, Gateway to the Future, which a very interesting report that many of us, especially those of us that worked in the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at OMB, were very interested in. So a lot to do. And Ed, you've now, with this report, The Future of Agile Government, paved the way toward where we go next. So what is new about this report, and how can governments at all levels use it?
Well, I think the newness of the report comes from, as Angela Evans has noted, its comprehensivity. We think we've done our best at this point, and there may be more. I understand there's some new people on the call today. We're delighted to have them. We're starting to hear that some state and local governments. Dan has talked about Miami-Dade being a leader in this area, and we think that we may have the coordinator for Miami-Dade on today. This is exciting. The at all levels is a little bit ambiguous, and in the report we don't try to clarify it. We mean at local levels, at state levels, at federal levels, but also at project management levels, as low as that. Managing the organization in terms of running a component of it, or managing the entire organization. What's new is the integrated framework itself and the idea of simultaneous execution. When you look at the integrated framework, you'll see all of the principles of agile government in one place. And you'll see the idea that there's action back and forth across these principles. We expect leaders in government to be able to put strategies in place, bring teams together, integrate those teams with networks. Another report that came out today, Dan, was your Future Shock report, which talks extensively about the use of networks. That report foresees the kind of agile nature of the response that's needed in disasters. As you say, they don't hand out business cards during the disaster. It's best done by creating a network ahead of time. This is agile behavior, and we're going to be documenting in some other reports that we've got coming out. John Bryson, who you hear later, has one on the role of strategy and strategy mapping in agile government, although his is more focused on strategy mapping itself. What's new is the kind of thing that Angela is bringing to us in terms of looking at an agile learning program. So all of these things are the beginning, the seeds that have been sown by the comprehensive nature of the report and the cooperation that we've gotten. Long answer, sorry.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks for referencing the report that came out yesterday on a response to emergency management from professionals around the world, authored by Academy Fellow Chris Mim, former leader of the GAO Strategic Issues team. And that's also available on our website, and was also a collaborative venture with the Academy in terms of that report. So Ed, one of the things you wrote about in your report with Australia was the relationship of Agile and trust. Can you talk a little bit about how your new report relates to trust in government?
What we're finding across many different indices, I use mainly the OECD Trust Report, which surveyed 22 countries extensively and found that in all of those countries, less than 50% of the people that were surveyed trusted the governments that they were dealing with. Now, occasionally one of the governments would pop up, but in the aggregate, it was less than 50%. We think that there are two ways to improve trust that we can take. One is to improve competence. And what we're trying to do in agile government is make the organizations at all levels more competent and thus improve trust. We've seen in places like the VA in the United States the effect of this. Ireland was on a call the other day and talked about their ability to significantly improve trust by using agile techniques of public involvement and customer involvement. So we think it's possible to improve trust that way, but at the same time, we have to respect the public values of openness, fairness, and inclusion. We have to make sure that people understand that they're part of the problem. At the moment, because 19% of the people surveyed recently by Gallup said that government was the largest problem in their life. And this isn't the first time that's happened. So we're trying to improve competence, we're trying to respect public values, and thus improve trust. We'll keep our eyes on that OECD survey as well as others.
Thanks, Ed. And yeah, this adds to a large body of work on trust that's been done from a number of organizations, including NAPA, the Partnership for Public Service, et cetera. So it contributes to this ongoing dialogue. So in the report, you talk about sort of a refined definition of agile government, just so we get sort of a baseline for everybody on the call. Can you tell us about that definition?
I'm even going to read it to you because it has several parts, and I want to make sure I get the parts in the right order. We've been struggling with the definition for a long time. Dan and Angela have seen several versions. At the moment, definition 3.0 or 4.0, whatever it is complicated but integrated. Agile government is a principle-based integrated framework that involves interaction among teams and iteration with users and the public to develop and implement policies, regulations, and programs at all levels to transform government and improve trust. So let me just break that down. It's a principle-based, agile government principles, integrated framework. Teams, the public, customers, all working together to improve trust by transforming government. Now I can move those words around in different ways, but that's what we're really talking about. And I now have a platform that I'm comfortable standing on when somebody says, well, what is agile government? Like, so this is what it is. We'll be happy to accept emendations along the lines there. And Dan and Angela have both had input, as has Joe, in trying to make this definition better.
So emendations welcome even in real time for folks, as Joe said, the chat is open. Feel free to give your comments and then, of course, your questions, and we'll get to those later on. So Ed, you mentioned the integrated framework, which is a term of art you introduce in the report and it's part of the definition. Tell us about what this is and why it matters, how it relates to the principles.
Great. And here I want to call out John Bryson. John was looking at the work and he said, well, this isn't very new. This has all been done before. You just integrated it. And I said, my gosh, there's the moment. So what we did is we took all the principles and we said, well, all we have to do is make sure that our leaders articulate an appropriate mission based on evidence and have the ability to form networks and teams to satisfy the needs of customers and the public with speed, persistence, and consistency. That's it. That's the integration. And it can start in a lot of different places. You can start with innovation if you wanted to. You can start with strategy if you wanted to. But you have to, at the same time, have all of them fit together. Being able to declare that your innovation drives strategy, your strategy drives the work of networks and teams, especially as they deal with customers and the public. So you can see back and forth how the integration plays with arrows going in both directions, feedback arrows going in both directions. I think that's very important because simultaneous execution, being able to do all of these things essentially at once, not necessarily in the same exact moment, but essentially in real time, is tremendously important to Agile government.
So as you're doing all these things together, you talk about having an Agile mindset. It's actually the first recommendation in the report. What do you mean by an Agile mindset? How does it relate to the principles in the framework? Are there examples of an Agile mindset?
Okay. Let's say that you're a new kid on the block, a new department chief, and you come into your department in the local government, the state government, the federal government. What we want you to do is essentially to default to Agile principles as you think about what your work entails. Don't worry about the issues that are bombarding you. When I was at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the first thing that happened is we got 28 material weaknesses. Gene Dodaro, who was then on the case, called and said, "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to, do something really bad to you. We're going to have to, place your entire department on our watch list." And I said, "An entire department?" I said, "Yep, you're the first one to make it as a whole department." We couldn't worry about each of those 32 or 38 material weaknesses. What we had to do is we had to deal strategically. Henry Cisneros was great about how we would resolve them. We built teams to deal with each of the set of audit requirements, and we networked back with the people in the housing areas and the housing authorities around the country and the providers of services. And we made sure that we were actually serving the public. We brought some new programs in. And if you look around at public housing now, you'll see the significant differences, what Henry did those many years ago, Henry and the team did those many years ago. So the mindset means that you start by looking at the framework, looking at the principles, and seeing how they apply to the problems that face you. I did the same thing when I was at the Recovery Act. I was happy to be able to build teams to create networks with the other governments and with our auditors in the Recovery and Transparency Board.
So that's great. So let's think again about sort of moving forward as we look to the panel discussion in a couple of minutes. How do you think the recommendations in the report can move from sort of words in a document to an actionable roadmap that's helpful for government and for the public and its interactions with the government? How might those interactions occur?
We're hoping to use every means of learning available starting next year by putting a program of Agile learning together. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But to reach out wherever we can. So I'm going to be talking to a class in regulation soon. I'm actually going to be talking to the Saudis through OECD. I'm going to be talking to ASPA. Wherever we can find a forum, we're going to talk about the nature of the framework, the nature of the principles, and how to develop an Agile mindset. We're hoping that a formal, structured Agile education program, Agile learning program, will be a cornerstone of this. And recently, Bill Eggers, who's a fellow at NAPA, did a wonderful report on how you learn in government. And it's not just classes. It could be YouTube. It could be little mini courses. It could be in-service learning. So there's lots of ways to learn, and we're going to take every avenue possible. I've got a staunch ally in Angela Evans and a staunch ally in Suzanne Duncan, and we're going to reach out to Suzanne Duncan. Suzanne Logan, and we're going to reach out to lots of other people, including people on this call, to participate in the Agile Learning Program. That's where the seeds will be cast, and we believe that those seeds will bear fruit.
Well, thanks, Ed, for that look into the report. I know that Terry Gerton, my IBM Agile leader colleague, Chris Perdue, and I were proud to co-sign the foreword to the report, and we will be releasing. You are the first people to be hearing the full scope of the report, which we will turn on live on the web at 11:30 at the conclusion of this meeting. So we'll also send the link out to everybody so you have it in front of you. So we're going to now move into the panel mode, and Ed will stay with us for discussion. So Joe, if you can, and James, if you can put the panel highlighted on the screen, I'll introduce each of our panelists. Melodina Stevens is the professor of inundation management at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government in Dubai. Melodina specializes in research in agile government, crisis management, entrepreneurship. She's done much publishing around the world in these fields. And has had many past academic appointments, including an appointment as Dean of Faculty at a major university in Germany. Melodina works with leading companies and governments around the world, and she has what I think is one of my favorite titles that I've seen in a bio. She is the Certified Practitioner of Emotional Intelligence with a company. So Melodina, welcome, and we'll be happy to talk about that at another time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us from Dubai. Angela Evans. Angela, if we can spotlight Angela. Let's see, there she is. I see her up in the corner, but I'll start talking about the great career that Angela's had. She is the Dean Emerita for the Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin, and was the Dean from 2016 to 2021. In another hat, I was and remain an adjunct associate professor at LBJ. So in a sense, Angela was my boss in that capacity. Angela also came to LBJ, having been a professor there since 2009, as a longstanding deputy director of the Congressional Research Service, a leader on many issues facing Congress over those years. Angela is a fellow with the Academy and lucky for us, a visiting fellow with the IBM Center. Angela, welcome. And then finally, John Bryce. Oh, you're good. Thanks, Angela. Finally, and Angela joins us. Angela, are you in Austin?
Yes, I'm in Austin, Texas, and it's it was 36 degrees this morning, so we're all good.
Well, thank you. Yeah, those of us in the Washington area experienced the icy weather outside, so we'll try to be agile through it all. Last, John Bryson. John is a globally leading scholar and author. John is the McKnight Presidential Professor Emeritus at the Humphrey School of Management at the University of Minnesota. John has more academic honors and awards than I can count. He is recognized around the world as a leader in his field. Many in the Academy have learned from John over the years. John is also a fellow with the Academy. Welcome, John.
Glad to be here.
So we're going to start in an agile fashion. We're going to do a little show and tell. So we're going to start with John. And John, you've led significant work on strategy development, and it's got a relationship to agile management, which you'll further talk about in your IBM Center report that Ed mentioned earlier that will be released in January on the concept of strategy mapping. So tell us a little bit about strategy mapping and then how it relates to agile government.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction. And let me share my screen with you. And I hope this shares. So I hope you can see that.
We can. If you go to slideshow mode, that'll be even bigger.
There we go. Uh-oh. Are you seeing my, I want to get the notes out of here. Let me try that again.
It's okay, John. Why don't you just go ahead?
All right. Sorry. So anyway, I want to talk briefly about strategy mapping, which I see as a way of helping people have the agile mindset that Ed talked about. Well, about a way of trying to see things whole. It's also a way about bringing people together across various kinds of boundaries, and it does so typically quickly, which is also a part of Agile. So it's a way of, in terms of leadership, again, a connection to Agile. I'm a fan of the Center for Creative Leadership's leadership ontology, which talks about leadership not just about leader-follower relations, but as really about direction, alignment, and commitment, which is the integration piece of the Agile framework. So let me check. Is my sound working okay here?
All clear, John. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So strategy mapping is a kind of causal mapping where you're trying to figure out what leads to what causes what. So management or leadership is about trying to make things happen. You ought to have some sense of causal relations when you're going about doing that. So think about these ovals as statements, as actions of one kind or another, and the arrows meaning if you do something like this down here. Can you see my cursor by any chance?
Yep.
If you do this, you're likely to get this and this and this. If you do this, you get that. If that happens, you get that. So it's a way of seeing how things fit together, how they integrate causally. Although I'm using causal here very loosely. Typically in these maps, the arrow means might cause, may lead to, might result in, might influence, and so on. So you use it when you're dealing with lots of ideas where the interconnections matter. So I think many of the issues that have been mentioned so far are all issues where lots of things matter. There's lots of stuff going on. And you want to tap into the best thinking of many people simultaneously. So the teams, for example, that Ed was mentioning that he put together or that others put together. And you want to know how mission, goals, strategies, and actions fit together. You want to know how to sort out conflicts, how to think about people's the different options that people have in mind for identifying a conflict, an issue, strategy that might address the issue. And basically you use mapping when, I say use strategy mapping when thinking matters. When you're not sure what to do, how to do it, or why. And so the logic of a strategy map is also, it's also the basic logic of a strategic plan. So strategy is what links, I think of strategy as what links aspirations and capabilities. So aspirations in terms of a strategy map and a strategic plan are about vision and mission. Vision and mission is a piece of the integrated framework. Goals and what my colleagues and I call negative avoidance goals, which we often find more bigger motivators of action, like don't go bankrupt or stay off, don't get chewed out in the secretary's office. And then strategies to help avoid the negative avoidance goals or avoid the negatives and achieve the mission and vision, and actions to implement the strategies. And the competencies and distinctive competencies are what are needed for taking the actions and implementing the strategies. So competencies, again, Ed was talking about the OECD trust framework. Competencies are really crucial to effective strategizing and strategy implementation. So there are three questions that are being answered here. I mean, what do you want to do? Which is where my mapping usually starts. How would you do that? And then, okay, if you did those things and that's how you do them, what would the consequences be? Would that get you closer to your vision and mission, to your goals and negative avoidance and addressing the negative avoidance goals? Just an aside here, typically in my experience, I usually don't start by asking people what their goals are, because in my experience, usually when you ask people what their goals are, what you get is a strategy. So I think it's more important, it's kind of wiser and in some ways smarter to ask people, what do you want to do? And then use that statement to help them articulate, well, what are the larger purposes, the consequences, positive and negative, that might be realized as a result of taking those actions. Anyway, here, quick example. Here's a strategy map from a collaboration I've been working with for a number of years. It's called Catalyst. It's a collaboration of nonprofit organizations here in the Twin Cities focused on supporting minority business enterprises here. So this is the upper end of a 300 statement map that was produced over 2 days in a retreat, strategic planning retreat. The upper end meaning this is the mission actually up here. Well, actually, these three are the mission: help minority business enterprises succeed. You do that by building the capacity of organizations to serve minority businesses. You do that by increasing the quantity and quality of stage-appropriate supports for minority businesses in Minnesota. These are subordinate goals. All the blues are strategies, and sub-strategies. So we started, again, this organization didn't really have, the collaboration didn't really have a mission when it began, or clear goals. So we just started, well, what do you want to do? And started fleshing out what became blues. Said, well, how do you want to do it? And then laddered up, it's called laddering up, into why they would do it. And that's where the goals came. And those are still the goals of this collaboration. Notice the interconnections here. Notice the integration of goals and strategies. So if you read most strategic plans, you don't see that. You see lists of mission, you see a statement of mission, somehow their goals show up, somehow strategies show up. You don't see the logic that holds those things together. I'll just show you a quick example of here's a picture from a group, a cross-functional, a group working on the cross-functional issue of how to reduce traffic deaths to 0 in Minnesota. So this brought together people from emergency management, engineering, enforcement, and education. Here they are writing down answers to the question, well, what do you want to do? And anyway, the result is a map like this one. This has 100 statements in it, and it was one of 3 maps in this room that helped clarify cross-level, cross-functional, cross-sector strategies for reducing traffic deaths in Minnesota to 0. And it was fast. So strategy mapping can help to cross boundaries, horizontally, vertically, functionally, sectorally. It can help people literally see what other people are saying, and it can help people literally be on the same page. It helps manage complexity, and it helps move quickly and agilely. So let me stop sharing there. And that's just a quick introduction to mapping. And I hope I've talked about how it connects with the integrated Agile framework.
And let me add one thing to John. First, John, I want to thank you. John brings one tool. He brings this wonderful strategy mapping tool. Question I ask everybody else is, what other tools do we need? Eric Popiel could not be with us today. Eric is an OPM person who's in the strategic forecasting business. We need strategic forecasting as well. I mean, to think about alternate scenarios. We need agile learning. We talked about that earlier. What other tools are you working on that would be helpful to moving forward agile government? I notice my friend from the University of Pennsylvania, welcome Yale, it's good to see you here. How do we move forward with agile regulation more adroitly? Yale is in that business. So Dan, back to you. I just wanted to put in that commercial for people in the chat room to fill up our basket with things that we can do to integrate, to implement the Agile Government Framework.
Thanks, Ed. And yes, please do put comments in the chat, and we will be sharing the slides with the group after the call. And thanks again, John, for the preview of coming attractions. We'll have your report out in early January, and we'll, of course, send that to folks when it's out. So, and also thanks for talking about the relationship to Agile Government. Any final thought on that before we turn to Angela?
Well, so yes, I should have mentioned, I mean, the mapping is just one tool among a variety of tools. Actually, I think one of the most important tools for Agile government, furthering out Agile government is just the array of stakeholder identification and analysis tools. I mean, figure out who counts here, and who are we trying to help? And so those are really crucial. In fact, I usually say when it comes to strategic planning that if you have time to do only one thing and one thing only, do stakeholder analysis. So let me stop there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and of course, complex problems in governance in the 21st century almost inevitably cross boundaries, are constantly changing. And so disciplines like yours can help as we frame Agile government. And what is needed for that are competencies, are skilled leaders who understand these principles. And Angela Evans has written a report previously for the IBM Center and with the Agile Government Center on Agile as a channel to reform public affairs education, to reform how schools of government teach both students that are getting full-time master's degrees and also students who are in the middle of their career and taking time out or maybe taking a class at night, sort of those in-service students. So Angela, can you outline some specific actions that can be taken in the area of Agile learning and talk about a little bit how Ed's new report combined with your prior work, advances this field?
Yes, I will. Thanks, Dan and Ed and everyone at NAPA. This has been a really great experience for me. You're great colleagues, and I see a lot of people on this meeting that I haven't seen in a really long time, and I wish you all well, and everyone have a great holiday season. Before, I don't have a chance to say that, but let me go through a few things that I wanted to, make sure people understood. My report is called The Agile Government, the Role of Public Affairs Education. It was written to address several persistent challenges that I've seen in my 5 decades of public service. One of those is that those of us who research and teach public leadership and management have not been fully successful in ensuring that governments have the steady supply of relevant expertise that are ready to meet the challenges of public service, no matter the setting, no matter the issue. This is agility. Another is that the environments in which public servants work often do not expect or embrace agility. They're rigid, they're worried about making mistakes, and so we're working in environments that by their very nature really are pretty rigid. Another is that the foundational programming and methodologies used in the formal educational settings in which pre-service and in service public servants learn, they're pretty stale. They haven't been revolutionary. They haven't really changed. They're very difficult to change. And often they're not really aimed at bridging the learning that goes on with the doing. So, one of the things, being the dean of the LBJ school, I remember, President Johnson had the saying, he wanted the school to produce learners and doers. So that's interesting that it's almost come full circle for me. And so, when I think about it, in our profession, with the responsibility as meaningful as public service, I don't think we've been as successful as we could be in establishing a robust, consistent exchange between the research and practice. It remains a struggle, and sometimes it just remains one-off. So some people can be very successful in working with communities or the state or the federal government. When they go away or their partners go away, that coalition and that working arrangement go away. We have to have it be more a part of our, an integral part, an innate part of what we do in public service. So in my report, I attempt to offer both the skills and competencies that I see as necessary to meet these challenges, as well as an educational program to grow these skills. So my report is not the answer, but it's a start to a conversation that maybe will lead to change. And I think a critical component and outcome of these changes would be a strong presence and preferred practice of agility. While we're discussing agile government in a formal way today, when it comes down to it, it really is a practical, common sense way to ensure that governments truly are tackling the right problems with the right people in the right way. So if you look at Ed's report contributes in several ways to agile government learning and how we can try to move this forward. And these need to be part of the university and government professional development programs. And I'm just going to mention 5. First, his report recognizes the importance of approaching agility in an integrated way. There is not one single factor or competency that defines agility. It's the combination of many factors, characteristics, actions that taken together result in supporting an agile governance structure. I see agile government as an ecosystem. It depends on well-established, sustained interactions among critical components of that system. If you take away one component, that ecosystem is not going to be as strong. Another way some may look at it is that agility forms the glue that binds the skills to the challenges. So I see agility as a very fundamental construct in all of the things that I'm doing in terms of our educational processes. So that's the first. The second thing his report does is he shows that achieving agility means acting in real settings with real problems. So Ed's report brings in a wide array of examples of how various sectors and levels of government has used agility to tackle problems. I think this is very important so people can see illustrations of how this works. The third thing that I think Ed's report does, it starts the transition of agile concepts from its origins and technical applications to those involving foundational management challenges. So I think it's essential, if Agile is going to be useful, that people see it in a wider public setting than technical applications. The fourth thing that Ed's report does, it provides these great case studies that show the power of using Agile governance concepts to successfully address some of these lingering, what we call wicked public problems. He shows how real situations have benefited from the adoption of Agile principles. And I think that's really good. Case studies are always good where people can relate to real life situations. And fifth, as Ed said, his report serves as a compendium of the status of Agile government activities across sectors and across governments. This is not something that should be minimized. It's very important to see where we are in an integrated way across how we're thinking about agility. And Ed's report has done that. And so I think these are all useful when trying to determine the best in-service and pre-service approaches that we can ensure that what I said at the beginning, that we are guaranteed that we have this really robust pool of people working in public service, and we have the environments in which they work that can nurture this expertise.
So that's great, Angela. And in order to get that expertise developed, we've previously talked about the idea of having a forum on Agile learning. And I know you talked about this a little bit in your report. As a tactical matter, what wouldn't be included in such a forum?
So we've been struggling with this, because we talk weekly and every few weeks we'll get together, and then we're trying to bring the network, grow the network, et cetera. So what we're thinking, like, okay, so we've been talking about this. We know people are working on it. So what are we going to do? So you, Dan, and Ed, and others at NAPA and in the network, we believe it's time to use the knowledge we've gained on Agile government and develop training and learning experiences that build agility within the public governance structure. It's as simple as that. But how are we going to do that? So one of the things that I've been talking to Ed about is that we need to bring together people who have worked not only in this network, but who've developed curriculum and experiences that can be used at both the in-service and pre-service level across audiences. So to do this, we believe we should bring together over a several-day workshop or a series of workshops, forums, to help us determine the what and how of Agile learning. We hope the outcome of the workshops or the forums would be a map or a plan for how best to create the learning content, who best to deliver the content, and how to use the standing of NAPA and this group to formally endorse the learning and delivery of Agile government. So, for example, how do we bring together this collective expertise, create a curriculum and a pedagogy that can be adopted by schools of public affairs and individually, or it can go by their accrediting body, which is really NASPA, which is the accrediting agency for the public affairs schools. It can be used in-service training. It can be used by people across different government levels and their partners. And so we're seeing how we can use this collective expertise and this collective knowledge now to bring together people to actually create learning. And this could be modules, it could be curriculum. We're open to a lot of different ways of doing this. So that's our goal in the next few months, is to bring these ideas together in a workshop, so we actually have concrete outcomes.
Well, thanks.
I want to add one thing to what Angela said.
Mm-hmm.
And for people on the phone, we're looking for partners, not just partners in developing the material that Angela talked about, but in delivering it. I've talked to the Australian-New Zealand School of Government. It's a little late there, so they're not on the call, but we think they'll be a good partner in taking the material that's developed, making it available broadly in lots of different places, not just Australia and New Zealand. Their network goes throughout Southeast Asia. So anybody on the call who has the desire to be a partner in this effort, if you would just put your name in the chat, James will record it, and we'll be delighted to, first of all, you all will be invited to be part of the forum. And I'll talk about the forums later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But the delivery is another thing that the forum is going to address, not just the development.
Can I say one other thing? And Melodina knows about this too. I mean, what has happened through the Agile network is we've been exposed to people who've been working on different aspects of this all over the world. And people have different methodologies, they have different approaches, they have different cultural environments in which they're working. So instead of just talking and then going about our merry way when we leave these forums, it's like we try to figure out how we can capture the collective wisdom of everybody who's worked on this, whether they're working from a tool perspective, like John, like what can we use to actually help us train people to develop this, or whether we look at Melodina and all the work that she's done internationally with folks who have very, very different approaches to their government and are in very different sovereign states. We have to move. We just can't be just talking every quarter about what every individual is doing, but integrating it in a way so anybody who's interested in helping us come up with something that is an integrated approach that can be used across sectors, of course, we're welcome to have you be part of our thinking.
Well, thanks, Angela and Ed. And this network was created as a network 3 years ago to do the kinds of things that you're describing. We deliberately kind of looked at that model as a best practice from Agile work over the decades. And I see people starting to pitch in to say that they want to be part of this sort of sub-network that we're describing here in terms of building out the learning. So that's just terrific. Please continue to come forward and also continue to give your thoughts and questions, and we'll handle them at the end. But let's come back to Melodina, who literally wrote the book on Agile governance, a book called Agile Government, Emerging Perspectives in Public Management. And in that book, one of the premises, and I'm going to quote you here, Melodina, is that governments of today are not able to transform and adapt to changes in the world around them as demanded by their constituents. And so, a lot of work that Ed described is sort of talking about this tie between customers and the public and governments and creating greater channels. So tell us a little bit about the reaction to your book, and then how the report that Ed's written kind of can help frame Agile government globally in a way that matches your findings.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. I think Ed found me, so that's great, because we began working in 2018 too on Agile government. And we began surprisingly with trying to understand what skills would make a government more agile. In 2020, we had a conference for 1,500 government officials where we debated this topic. We brought in people from all over the world who were running experiments in Agile government. So we had the behavioral unit in UK, we had Mindlamp from Denmark as an example, someone from Estonia. And we realized there wasn't much agreement on this topic at all. So the pandemic hit immediately after. We did this in February. The pandemic came, we had a lot of time, so we said, let's work on this book. So it's an edited book. I have 2 other editors with me. But what was fascinating was collecting insights from all over the world. And I think, I agree with Ed, there's a lot of definitions going around on Agile government. There's a lot of confusion because most people say Agile government and they think of Agile methodologies. So they're thinking of projects, and that's not really what Agile government is. It's a much more systems level, higher level, transformative thing. And I like that it's principle-based integrated framework. The other important thing is when Ed talks about trust, for example, it is co-created, right? In today's world, especially with social media, when you need the citizen to participate. For example, masks was a great example. If I don't wear a mask, it's your safety at the other end of it. So we require the community to get together. As an example, this is becoming extremely hard to get that common value. So this co-creation for trusts is also extremely important. Sometimes also there's a tendency to identify with an organization rather than the government. So what is the government? It's a collection of organizations. So when we say the government is responsible for delivering public value, it's really about each individual organization and that nested approach. I think this gets lost very often, it becomes competitive for resources, for example, or for visibility. So the things in this framework I really love is that we're actually talking about all of those in different ways. You asked about the book. So the book's much more, with more examples from an international perspective. And I love that what's applicable, let's say in the detailed examples in USA, is also applicable across the world. And maybe I can give you some examples as we go on, or Daniel, I'll wait for the next question and then see whether I should illustrate it with some examples.
That's great. Why don't you can wrap that in, because I think the examples that you cite are about transformation. And a lot of the Agile is not done because it's a cool thing to do, although it is in many ways. It's done for a purpose, as John talked about achieving important missions in a complex world where technologies are becoming, ever more part of how governments achieve their mission, but also how groups work together. So tell a little bit about your book and the framework and recommendations in the future. How does it assist governments sort of get to that transformative stage?
So the book basically gives many different ways of which we can adopt agile governments. It's more exploratory because I agree with what Angela said. We're not there yet on the research and there isn't an alignment over there. So for example, I found fascinating that it was the military that was talking about storytelling. So one of the chapters is about narratives, and we forget how important that agenda setting is in this very complicated world. Or, the role of data, because we use technology, we have too much data, but it needs to be in a size that a decision maker can take an action in, needs to be understandable to the constituents, otherwise they don't understand the framework behind it. So there are lots of these little tiny things. And I want to give you some examples, not necessarily for the book, because I think things become outdated very quickly. But if I look at strategy as an example, UAE, very few people know this, has the largest international humanitarian hub. And it's very simple. We live in the most crisis-prone region in the world. But when the pandemic came and all the flights got grounded, they worked on a coal supply, value chain, logistics. And today, the International Humanitarian Hub is one of the largest suppliers of vaccines to this side of the world, even in the cases of humanitarian aid. So it's a fantastic example where something that could be totally destroy your economy, you kind of pivot across and then you do good with that. Another example would be perhaps the government of Seychelles. With the Paris Agreement, it was very clear the more richer countries needed to go and put some money aside for these lower income countries to avoid the effects of climate change. It didn't really happen with COVID because the priorities shifted. So what they started doing is taking care of seagrass, and they're working on the Paris Agreement to consider seagrass as actually a natural way to neutralize carbon. So it's about reframing, I think, a situation or a problem and trying to figure out a solution that's different. And I think this is very, very critical when I look at agile government. You don't need to have a new solution. You can have an existing solution. You need to look at a problem and understand whether it's an old problem or it's a new problem. And what's happening is sometimes generational wisdom is getting lost. So we keep thinking it's a new problem and we aren't able to tap into resources. So great, another example is the mission to the moon. We did it in such a short time when John F. Kennedy said, I want somebody safely on the moon before the end of the decade. But if you look back, only 12 people have gone to the moon. And now to restart the whole thing, when I speak to engineers, they talk about how much knowledge is lost because the system's changed. The technology is different. And that's fascinating also for agile government. It's not always about new and shiny. There's a lot of wisdom. It's how do we capture that? I want to give another example from organization, and we talked about that. So I'll take an example from the UAE. One way we keep knowledge flow going is we have what is called a majlis, and majlis is an informal way of connecting. Now the UAE is unique because 80% of the population is expatriate, or 85% of the population. So when you think of a very small national, who are citizens, how do you get information from all these different countries and cultures and businesses to ensure that you create policies that are useful? And I think in the last year, they introduced quite a phenomenal number of new policies, about 90 or so, which again, for me is so exciting because it's through this informal and formal networks, right? And then there's Barbados, who decided to put a diplomatic government in the metaverse. And one of the challenges that they had, and they articulated it this way, that they had, I think, only 18 physical structures, and it's a resource problem. To create an embassy in every country for a small country is just not physically possible. The metaverse would make access a lot more easier. But then here comes an interesting thing at an international level where I think agile government will work, is, does the Vienna Convention accept a virtual embassy as an embassy, right? So you see, when you're dealing with things like agile government, you really need to be, let's say, have dexterity in the mindset. So it's a mindset change. You need to think of possibilities rather than just always impossibilities. You've got to accept you won't have all the answers, but your collective team might. And that's a huge, big thing, you know, where it's always about me and my visibility. I don't think these are easy things to teach. And I think this is hard.
Well, that's why Angela is going to help us with the Agile Learning Program going forward. So thank you, Melodina. And I see as you've been talking, lots of discussion, offering to come forward and work on this problem with us in the chat from all over the world. I think I counted about 6 to 8 countries where people are writing in from, and many in the US as well. And I also want to point out our colleagues at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, who have been terrific partners throughout this process. And Marco Daglio talked about their resource there. So just a note to check that out in the chat as well. So we're going to have one last question of the panel, and then we're going to turn to your questions that you've been including in the chat. So please continue to do so. And that's really thinking about 3 to 5 years from now. What would success look like? What are some challenges and what are some opportunities in each of the areas? And why don't I start with sort of in the same order. So John, if you want to go first, and then we'll go around the horn, and then we'll ask Ed that same question to wrap it up. John? Let's see, John, you're on mute.
5 years from now, remember to unmute. It's hard to answer. Is this 25 words or less? I think one of the most important things to happen, I don't know if it will or not, I hope this might be part of the Agile curriculum, is helping people think in systems terms. Think systemically. I mean, here's a case where mapping can work. You can use mapping to help create models or representations of systems, and then figure out where do you intervene in them. But so many of these problems that people are being taught, or that have confronted us, that people worry about, are really systemic problems that go beyond any single organization. So if you're going to intervene in a wise way, you have to have some sort of representation that's revisable of what the system or systems are like that you're trying to change. So I would love to see systems thinking be much more prominently introduced into curricula and become part of problem solving.
That's great. And one of the examples in Ed's report around the development of vaccines in the US, to cite the example that Melodina talked about, I think really also represented that concept. And if you take a look at the report, you'll see that in the case around Operation Warp Speed. Angela, your thoughts about the future and learning?
Yeah, that's a tough question too, but what I'd like to say is that the Agile Government Network has grown and found ways to exchange ideas and successes to do real work, and we do that on a consistent basis. That we don't need formal settings or formal forms, that we're just such a tight group that we're able to do this very easily. And I would really hope that in 3 to 5 years, we have a curriculum that's been drawn from the best practices and that's applicable across the settings we've been talking about and across the sectors, and that this curriculum is in demand. Folks want to learn from us, so that we have strong testimonials from those who've learned, and that we show through these learners that governments are actually operating and performing at a much higher level. The other thing I really hope, and this is trying to be more practical in this, that we have a strong funding foundation, because we really do need some support to do this. And I would hope that funders would really see the benefit in this and help us, really not only just seed it, but actually continue to get this, integrated. Also, I would, again, NASPA would require Agile learning as part of its accreditation process. Now, NASPA is the accrediting agency, not all schools of public affairs or public policy, public administration have accreditation, but it's a powerful organization and that can move change into the public affairs schools. So I would hope that that would be an organization that's really taken note of this, and that I really hope that NAPA sticks with this program and continues to support, not just in words, but really supports us with resources, and also thinks about how they can use the fellows with the incredible expertise that's resident in the NAPA fellows to further this. So we can see that involvement as well.
That's great, Angela. And as a proud fellow, I will continue to sign up for that effort. Melody, talk about a little bit from your perspective about the transformed future from Agile.
So we know from history, from reinventing governments and everything that's happened before, that so far these things don't have staying power. They work in small teams. They have problems as they scale. When someone pivotal leaves, the team dissolves. So what I hope in the future is through this curricula, we might actually be able to replicate and change the heart for service for public value. I find with time that becomes more and more difficult. We know that it's not easy for governments always to tap into the best talent and retain them, because the private sector offers a lot more money and it's shiny and glinty, and the success is much more reachable. Whereas the government thinks in generations. We're thinking 15, 30 years. You need patience. You won't always see the results of what you did today. And this is really tough. So how can we reward the heart for service? I think this is something I hope through this curricula, maybe there will be a lot more change coming in. We realize most of the problems today are grand challenges. So it's not about one country solving it. It requires many countries solving it, which adds an even larger layer of complexity. So I hope through these learnings that maybe the people who come together will start thinking at an international level too, not just at a very minuscule local level, because that's important, I think, for the future. And last but not least, I mean, agility is about balance. We had a big debate on this. How much of structure can you keep on changing and without everything dissolving? Now, it works well during crisis because the structure automatically dissolves, but people can't take that much of change. So I think it's really about leadership and knowing what's the right balance between stability and structure. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't see much research on that. I'm hoping in the future we will research that so that this is something we can push forward in terms of skills training.
That's great. Well, thank all three of you for these great insights, and we'll get into Q&A in a minute. So Ed, clearly your work has spurred a rich discussion both among the panelists and across the world. And I'm reminded of Arlo Guthrie and the Line Analysis Restaurant. Can you imagine 50 people a day? So we have over 50 people talking about this as a movement, to paraphrase Arlo Guthrie. So Ed, think about the future for us as well, and kind of give us your perspective on the panel's insights.
As the Australians would say, I'm gobsmacked about the number of people who are here, the breadth of the people. John Koskinen was nice enough to send me a note about the report the other day, and he said what impressed him is this becomes a global phenomenon. I want to go back, though, and be a little bit more parochial than that. In the mid-90s, and Steve Redburn may still be on this call, or Dan may, we began implementing the Government Performance and Results Act. And there wasn't a single agency, I was the Deputy Director for Management succeeding John Koskinen, that really wanted to do the Government Performance and Results Act. There was malicious compliance throughout the federal government. We were getting these things that I was grading them. I was a professor previously. I had them stacked all around my office. There was a ledge, I don't know if it's still there or not. And I had 23 different reports, and there was no A's, not even close, and 3 or 4 F's. And I called one of the F's and I said, look, you have 2 choices. You can let me send this on to the Vice President Goro's there, and with a comment that this is really awful and he should call the secretary, or you can fix it. You have 2 choices. Well, he fixed it, but it was only lip service, not even passionate lip service. that was going on then. But there was a statute, and there were a group of people who were Walter is not with us today. Walter Grossek he's physically still alive. I mean, he just didn't join today, but who were tenacious about moving this forward. And today, when you look at the work that Dustin Brown has done, not just here in the United States, but also through OECD globally, you find that performance is something that people are really accepting. They're accepting the fact that they have plans, that they have cross-agency priority goals, et cetera, et cetera. What we need to do is bring Agile to them in a way that helps them implement what they're doing. We've seen a couple of calls from the federal government here in the United States to be more agile, and specifically referencing the report that Joe Mitchell and Sally Yeager created. We need more of that. We need institutionalization. It's a terrible thing to say, but there needs to be a set of legislative frameworks here in the United States or elsewhere that help to move Agile forward. What I'd like to see in the next 3 to 5 years is the coming forward of those frameworks. Well, gee, how can you institutionalize Agile? I don't know, but let's talk about it and see what we can do. So that's what I'm hoping for, Dan.
Well, thank you, Ed, and thanks again to the panel for a terrific discussion. And Joe Mitchell, I'm going to pass the baton to you to guide us through the chat.
Great. So first of all, as Ed had said, I'm really pleased with all of the commentary, the back and forth that people have, the engagement. There were a few questions that I wanted to specifically note here. One was around, and John, this is probably to you, around kind of strategy. And so as we think about, you're developing your strategy as an organization, you've got to manage your strategy, but then you also are going to be, if you implement Agile, kind of your operational model may change. So how kind of at the strategy development standpoint, from that standpoint, the strategy management standpoint, how do we incorporate Agile? How do we recognize that's the transformational aspects of Agile?
Well, so one thing I would say is that the very best strategists that I know, and I actually have this research project around how really excellent strategists think. The best strategists actually don't think of strategy as separate from operations. They actually have this in their head. They're actually always going sort of up and down the abstraction specificity ladder between very high level mission and purposes. And how would this actually work? And so one of the things I like about the integrated Agile framework is that it tries to encourage that kind of thinking, mission and vision at the top, and then how do we make it happen at the bottom? So I think of Agile as an integrated Agile. I think of the integrated Agile framework as a way of helping people at all levels, really, across sectors and so on, be better strategists. Mm-hmm. Meaning clarifying vision and mission, letting purpose be their guide, but making sure on the ground things get better for important audiences.
Mm-hmm. So the best strategists understand strategy and operations are connected, and maybe
I had a long-winded way of saying that, but it's it's a mistake to think of strategy, mission, and vision as divorced from operations. You got to be able to get there.
Right. Well, great. Do other panelists have any comments on that particular issue, or Ed, or do you have any?
Two things quickly, Joe. We've got to make sure that we involve customers in co-creation. Human-centered design is tremendously important. And we also have to make sure that the public is part of the discussion. This is new and different for many government people, including myself, that we need to reach out to customers and the public and do some elements of co-creation along the way.
Great. So that integration and the public is important. Any other thoughts about the kind of connection between strategy and operations and Agile? Okay, so another question that came up, and this was specifically to Angela and Ed, but would love to get other people's thoughts on this from your perspectives in terms of different governments, but the whole notion of how you institutionalize a mindset, given, especially at the federal government, and really at other levels of government, there's high turnover, there's very traditional kind of thinking. So how do you kind of get that mindset within the current federal context and the context that we see in other levels of government? So Angela, maybe I'll ask you that first.
I think this is the question, because this is something I was talking about when I spoke earlier, is that the environment, the government environment is such that it doesn't really support this organically or naturally. So I think one of the ways is success and persistence. I think that, and it works, like people will use things that work and that they don't see as formulaic. So one way is to really, this is why we're looking at the Learning Center, is how do we present this kind of information to people in a way that's not individualized, but really is a way that people can see their own situation in there. In the learning experience, they can see that as a way to help them through some of their day-to-day. It has to be relevant to the work they're doing. It just can't be another fad that we add on. But that they see this as relevant, that they see success, and that we're just persistent. I think that's one way. I don't think and you're just going to turn the mindset around. It's got to be a lot of different things. And this is where I think the workshop and forums can help us think through how we get this grounded and how we get this accepted as just part of your normal way you work and the normal way you expose people to the kinds of learning environments that they need to be exposed to.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think actually, kind of, you've got to have the mindset, but then you have to actually do this. And then as you do this, you further develop the mindset. So it's kind of related. And I saw you nodding your head as Angela was talking. So I wanted to turn the mic over to you for any other insights.
Yeah, I was just thinking last night, I was thinking about this presentation when I couldn't sleep, which was a lot of the night last night. And there's an analogy of management to being a gardener. Well, it's very nice being a gardener. I think there also is an analogy to cooking, to being a chef. Once or twice a year, I'll make paella. And paella is an integrated framework, John, of chorizo and clams and mussels and shrimp and et cetera, et cetera. And you've got to have a recipe. You can't just wing it because you forget how much saffron am I supposed to use. And so I think what we've got with Agile government potentially is a recipe for success in government. People take it out, take the framework ethics. Let's see, gotta make sure we do the innovation side of it. You make sure that it turns out right. It'll be different for different people. Some people don't like chorizo, so they make their paella with ham or something like that. But we've got to make it, as Angela said, so that it is the way we do things here. And here's the recipe for success. And just do it, and it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. Great. Melodine, I was wondering what you've seen in UAE and other countries.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say sometimes you need to nudge the system. And that's what they do in UAE. In 2012, they introduced a star rating system for customer service. So it's mystery shoppers. Anyone who uses the service is then contacted later, and you actually rate on a scale of 0 to 7 stars. And if you fall below a certain thing, you're publicly hauled out for that department. So it's been very fascinating to see the transformation in the services, especially because we adopted digitalization very, very quickly, and governments had no choice but to deliver. So that's been one way to nudge the system, is top down, but that requires very strong leadership at the top and the ability to deploy it across everything else. It kind of works in our side of the world really well.
Great. And John, what have you seen? What have you seen in this regard?
Well, I'm still remembering Ed's talk about the introduction of the Government Performance and Results Act in the 90s. Not so long ago, I read Peter Drucker's autobiography, and he said that whenever, as he was looking back on his long life, one of the things that struck him about really important changes was that behind them was typically what he called a monomaniac with a vision. Well, Ed was describing some monomaniacs with a vision, right? Who really stuck with it and did lots of different things, as the other panelists have talked about, to make the vision operational. So it takes including helping people understand how this works for them and for the people they care about and for the people they're trying to serve. So I'm all for monomaniacs with a vision, you know. Ed would be a shining example around agility, and you know, other panelists as well, Angela and Melodina. So just we need more of them everywhere to try to make this happen, who really stick with it for the long term.
So maybe we rename our forum the Maniacs. We'll think about that.
When we get to 10,000 maniacs, we'll be able to sing a concert, like along with Arlo Guthrie. I would also note that we're talking about GPRA and its evolution, and we have one of the godfathers of the Government Performance and Results Act with us, Jonathan Brule at OMB, who was also my predecessor at the IBM Center, and has contributed so much to the field over time.
And I was remiss. I sent him a little note personally in not calling him out earlier. He is a true monomaniac.
If I could just insert here, though, it's a key piece of Drucker's observation was a monomaniac with a vision.
Not just a monomaniac.
Just any monomaniac.
So a vision that's a good vision. So great. So we had a couple of other questions. One was around thoughts on how to employ the Agile governance framework when utilizing or interacting with autonomous government systems. For example, smart traffic management systems. Are there thoughts about that? I think as we're looking at more and more autonomous systems, technology, what are people's thoughts on that? And related to that, I think there was another question or comment around the role of digital governance in Agile governments, and maybe combining both of those to think about the role of technology in the world of Agile. Just open that up to any panel member that wanted to comment.
I'd love to jump into that. So I do a lot of work on metaverse governance, AI governance, and recently just did a workshop on synthetic biology and governance. So I think technologies are tools, they assist, but it's still the human behind. So I think this is the challenging thing. At the end, it's our responsibility in government to protect people and planet. That's the way it goes, and by default, businesses. So we need to know how things will evolve. And unfortunately, with technology, the scale of evolution is faster than regulations can keep up when you look at that. I just saw a piece of research saying, you know, the airplane took 68 years to reach 50 million people. Pokemon Go, 19 days. So how do we keep up? I mean, that's why we really need Agile. But it's also this thing about impact and metrics. We need to monitor it. So it's not that we deploy the technology and leave it on its own. It's not self-evolving. Our law systems do not penalize technology, they penalize people. So there's this fundamental gap there. I hope there's more discourse on it. So I love that question. I still feel it should be people responsible behind the scenes for any technology they adopt, use, and ask people to use. But this is a personal view.
No, that's great. Great to hear about the personal, you know, the need for human accountability and importance. John, it looks like maybe you're wanting to come off mute.
Well, so one of the great things about specific technologies that I'm familiar with is there are a number of softwares that now are really quite able to help people do mapping. So I showed you in my presentation an example of sort of manual mapping, but now they're cloud-based softwares that allow people around the world simultaneously to construct maps and do something about them. So so it's very quick. You pull in a lot of knowledge. You can do things rapidly and effectively. I think that's a good thing. So I would personally, I just hope more people learn how to make use of mapping and these various softwares so that they can clarify their purposes and their strategies and operations and just move ahead quickly.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Joe, if I could just add, Agile came out of the software world, as a number of us recall and Ed documents in the report. And as a tool of bringing people together, these teams that we've been talking about, these networks, in an Agile network, the technologists and the program officials and hopefully the lawyers and even the inspectors general might be working together in a manner in which everybody kind of plays their own role, but understands ex ante how to operate quickly should the situation occur. Ed mentioned the report that was released a couple of days ago, authored by Chris Mim, Napa Fellow, and on emergency management. And the idea of pre-positioning a network to be responsive is so important in especially addressing how technology can help address emergency response.
Right.
I would like to, echo what Melodina said as well. It's a tool. I mean, and some people I think one thing we have to be careful of is it's the trap of, this is cool, this is nice, this is interesting, and the technology is kind of fun to play with. But what is the technology actually doing for whom and why? And I think those are sometimes things that people don't think about. They, enter into this because it's a cool thing to do and it's a nice thing to learn, and boy, it's nice and easy and efficient and I can see things, and who builds the technology are minds, because I remember thinking about using technology and applying it to business processes, and then some of those processes were awful, and we were more efficient at doing awful things. So I think we need to think about, it has to be a perspective, and I think Melodine is right. You have to look at the human mind behind all of this.
Yep, great. Wonderful. If there are no more comments about that, we have another question that might be the perennial question in the room, and it's really around accountability, standardized metrics, all of that. And this person was saying that seems to be incongruent with agile thinking and implementation. So, do you have suggestions for thinking about how to implement agile when you're dealing with, I think more broadly, really a very highly regulated, structured environment with standardized kind of reporting metrics? Do people have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, let me try that, Joe. One of the things we try to suggest in the report is that metrics are extremely important to determining whether or not you're accomplishing what you set out to do. But you should do it in an agile way. So Melodina talked about, and Ireland is a terrific example of this, a customer service and setting metrics that are customer service standards, monitoring those standards, making sure that customers get served. And when that happens, what we've seen in many cases is that trust in government goes up because you're dealing with the customer in a way that they understand. But if you didn't have the baseline framework of what the customer cares about, you wouldn't have any way to determine whether or not things got better. So accountability systems are not just about accountability, they're about making things better. So how do we use these systems in an agile way to improve what's going on in government on a continuing basis? That's the issue.
Mm-hmm. And Melodina, what not to put you on the spot, but I guess I'll ask this directly to you in terms of UAE and some of the innovative things you've seen there. How have you all struck this balance?
For the need for accountability, right?
Yes.
So one of them is what we're doing is anticipatory governance. So we see that sometimes, often to access services, people are entering the same data again and again and again, which is not only making their life difficult, but it's also leading to data duplication. So one of the things we are using technology there behind the scenes is to see how these processes on the back end can be combined to make the citizen's life much easier. So this is one big thing that we're doing in terms of accountability. We're having big discussions also on education. So I think this is interesting. So this is not just the UAE, but I think globally also, as an example, is the kid meant for education, is the education meant for the kids. So as we're moving to more personalized services, I think this becomes interesting. And then it's about teams and the talent that they bring into the team rather than what cutoff level do they have if we're talking about scores. So I think these are interesting things. We do need some rigid format because this is about transparency and this is about maintaining certain standards. I think that's the tough discussion, is when can you agree that the standard does not apply? And I think more likely the public will accept it the more transparent you are. So Reg Labs is one big way that they're actually doing this. We have a government accelerator that also works over here where in 100 days, different stakeholders are brought together to make changes. So this is, I think, the way forward.
I think this is I think Kelly has a really good question here. Because when you work in some systems, like if we're going to be working in pre-service, a public affairs education at the graduate level or across in a university setting, it is so tied to metrics that are grading and student testing. And, is there another way? Are there other ways that we can actually show the students have learned something? Is it a portfolio based? Is it something that you drop them into situations and you see how well they do? Are there ways that we can help students start thinking about being a member of a team by what that team expects from each other and each member, and how they assess that? I think this is a really, really important question, because people are going to demand that you show some positive outcome, but what is that outcome going to be? Once you have that outcome, then people are going to teach, or they're going to move toward that outcome. So this is an extremely important question. I think this is something that when we have the workshops and forums should be in the forefront of our minds about how we're going to make sure that we get this accomplished without jeopardizing our success with testing or very, very quantitative kinds of measures.
Right, and John Koskinen had a good point in the chat that we have to recognize these performance metrics are really supposed to be a catalyst for helping us to run our programs more effectively and efficiently. And certainly, I've seen a lot of times they kind of become the thing in and of themselves instead of being a thing to help us run things more effectively. So they become the end instead of the.
Hey, let me comment on John's question, because there's another tool embedded in it. And I'm about to send a copy of this report to Cass Sunstein. Whether he'll read it or not is another thing. But the idea of agile nudges, that structuring something using the technology the framework of nudging is, I think, a tremendous idea. And John, I had that last night too. Maybe it was heartburn, I don't know, but I had that idea that I had to get a hold of Cass and look at that idea. How do we do agile nudges that are done by teams and networks and on a consistent basis use strategy to move government forward? So thanks, John.
Thank you. So we have two people whose hands are raised. So Dan Gutman, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I just told Joe that I best shut up in these webinars, but I'm prompted to comment by the mapping and by the performance measures. As some of you know, I've been lucky to be a co-organizer of a NAPA-sponsored Australia, China, US climate adaptation project. You're all welcome. And core questions are whether all the things we're talking about need to be transformed for adaptation. So talking about mapping, turns out there are vast numbers of public sources, NOAA, NASA, the USGS's 100-year-old now geospatial data. The latest RAND report 2022 says, hey, don't use these in your kitchen. Local governments, except maybe New York or Los Angeles, simply don't have the capacity. And we're not talking about simply the vast amounts of data, but for mitigation, greenhouse gas reduction, that's easy. You can look at regions. What you need for local adaptation is within, a block or a neighborhood. There's none of that. Looking spatial dimensions, looking forward, and every kind of, impact infrastructure. So core question, where do we go? Help needed on adaptation data. The second, related, performance targets. Easy enough if you want to increase the number of visits to the VA or students with test scores. But with adaptation, there are no useful performance targets. These are things that may or may not happen in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So you build a seawall, the mayor dies. How do we know? So welcome. This is just by way of, Joe said, why don't I say something? I didn't want to, but really welcome all of your inputs on, you're talking about adaptation. What does it mean? We have vast amounts of data. Much of it is not useful at the local level. And to the extent it is, nobody at the local level in most cities knows how to use it. And the same question, you may know that, for example, President Biden in his first week issued guidance for federal agencies to have adaptation plans. They all have them, but what are the performance targets? You may want to look at the work of Liz Losas at Duke, and what should be KPIs? How do we think about KPIs for adaptation? So that's just by way of making a pain of myself and hoping I'm invited to lunch again, Joe. Thanks.
Well, we're not even serving lunch, so you're definitely invited back, Dan. But you would be invited even if we did have our sandwiches like we used to. Yeah, I think also, Dan does have a group. It's a comparative practices group looking at Australia and China and other countries. So please, if you're interested in that, especially in the area of climate adaptation, reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and we'll get you connected to that broader group. So great. And then we also had another question around public budgeting and any thoughts in terms of how the fact that the budgeting and finance process is sometimes a big roadblock. Any thoughts from our panelists before I turn it back over to Ed to just talk about the next year? Any thoughts that people have about budgeting and Agile?
So Joe, if I can join here in my former OMB hat, we obviously there's a lot of discussion at all levels of government around agility in budgeting and finance and fiscal year constraints, multi-year budgeting, et cetera. The use of some flexible budgeting tools in the shared services arena, working capital funds, franchise funds provide some help. The federal government's done some work in this arena around shared services, and especially with the technology, the Technology Modernization Fund. I see Steve Redburn is one of the members of the chat. He's done some research with our center. So to Junior's question, we can definitely follow up and provide some more resources on this concept of agile budgeting.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. If there are no other questions for our panelists, Ed, I will turn it back over to you for just a few minutes to give us a preview. I'm sorry, I think I have one more. Kangala, did you have your hand raised? Okay, maybe not. Okay, so Ed, back over to you in terms of telling us a little bit more about what we're going to be doing next year.
Joe, Steve Redburn had his hand up.
Steve, I apologize.
That's right. I was going to make a quick comment in response to Dan's invitation, and that is that agility in the executive implies much greater discretion in implementing the budget, which implies a much smaller role for Congress. They also need to be more agile and timely in enacting budgets, but the way appropriations are written essentially allows appropriators to micromanage agencies and is the enemy of agility in the executive. So I just make that general point.
Yeah. Great. I completely agree. And that's definitely part of what we've been thinking about with Agile policy. So Ed, I know that you have a robust agenda for the next year, so no rest for the weary for you. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Joe, it's really for us as opposed to me. What we're going to try to do is look at 4 forums. Angela has described the one on Agile learning. I think it will probably be the first, although I don't know. We're not going to be quite as rigid about quarterly meetings as we have been. It just takes a lot of organization to hit a particular month. So we'll be maybe a couple in the spring and a couple in the fall, or it'll be different. The other 3 forums that we're looking at are leadership. We've defined leadership, but we haven't looked enough for the cases and the places. And so Inez Mergel and I are going to give Dan a proposal. He just doesn't know that yet. He'll know more about it in a few minutes. Where we look globally, and Melodina will come out to you, obviously, look globally at who the leaders are who are acting in an agile fashion. But what does that look like? What is the case, if you will, around that? So that's leadership. We're also going to look at technology. I'm not sure that Dave Wintergren is still on. Dave has been a tremendous supporter along the way. And the question is, how does technology and agility come together? Dan talked earlier about technologists doing their products and bringing them to management. But management isn't often ready to use them in a particular way. And so they fall into desuetude, and we can't stand desuetude. Monomaniacs just despise it. So we'll be looking at the relationship with, and Dave and ACT-IAC are hopefully going to be our partners in looking at that in one of the forums. And I see Larry Rosenthal right there. There he is. The last forum is Agile policy development. We've did a wonderful job last year on Agile regulation, but Larry is helping, he's kind of the linchpin in Agile policy development. And I think, Larry, that's actually going to be the last one. I'm not sure where leadership and technology is going to fit, but we really do need to spend some time and get lots of people involved. We really need to have lots of people involved. And so we'll be reaching out over the next year to do that. I made it by 10:30, Joan. I'm turning it back to you.
Great. Well, listen, I cannot thank you all enough for being here today. And thank you, Ed, for this excellent report, Dan, for the great conversation, Paladina, Angela, John, thank you so much for being here, offering your insights. And so we look forward to continuing to work as a group. We know that we're all maniacs. And so we look forward to continuing this. And I hope that you all have a great holiday season, Happy New Year, and we look forward to seeing you in 2023.